everyone. Welcome to today's research seminar. Our speaker today is Dr. Majid Khabbazian. Dr. Khabbazian is an associate professor of electrical and computer engineering at the University of Alberta, Canada. His research interests generally involve designing fast, efficient, and secure algorithms for distributed systems and networks. He received his PhD from the University of British Columbia in 2008 and completed his postdoc at MIT in 2010. He's a director of the SecureX Lab at the University of Alberta, a senior member of IEEE, and a member of ACM and ASEE. Dr. Khabbazian, super excited to have you here. Thanks so much for taking the time. I'll turn it over to you and let you take it from here.
Okay, so today's talk is about reputation. In fact, I would like to introduce a new reputation system that we call Hashcashed reputation. Good. Okay, so you know that reputation plays an important role in our daily life. For instance, when we want to purchase something, let's say a pair of shoes, we take a look at the brand and consider the brand reputation in making decision, right? So if let's say the brand of a pair is Nike and the brand of the other pair is something that we haven't heard much from, and they have the two pairs have the same price, probably will prefer Nike, right? Or when we want to buy something from eBay, we will consider the seller's reputation. Another example is when we want to get a loan to, say, buy a house. This is something I did very recently. So I got to know that the bank consider something called credit score. I'm sure most of you know about this. Basically, they consider this score to decide if we are worthy of getting a loan with low interest rate. So it's a number between 300, 850, and recently got to know my number. So there are various reputation systems that are used today. And in most of these systems, reputation is built over time. For example, our credit score. Credit score is built up over time based on how we behave. For instance, if we keep paying our credit card bills on time, I guess over time, our credit score improves. So yeah, as I said, the reputation, most of the systems, existing system, is built over time. In this talk, I would like to introduce a new reputation system, which we call Hashcashed reputation. One of the things that distinguishes this Hashcashed reputation from other reputation systems is that in Hashcashed reputation, service providers make reputation on their own. And they do this using proof of work. Essentially, the way reputation is built in this system is through burning money. You burn money to gain reputation. The more money you burn, the higher reputation you get, basically. On the other hand, it's true that you make reputation on your own by, showing proof of work, but a client can destroy your reputation. A client can destroy a provider's reputation if the provider misbehaves. If a provider misbehaves and does not follow the contract, the client will create a publicly verifiable proof of breach. And that will destroy the reputation of the defaulting provider. To see how this system works, here's how I'm going to proceed. First, I'll briefly talk about Hashcash. I'm sure most of you, if not all, know about this. Then I describe the system components and their interactions, and I'll finish by one example. I finish by explaining a simple market that we can create using the Hashcash reputation. Okay, so Hashcash, as you know, is a proof of work method. Let's say we have a piece of data. What we do in this method is that we concatenate a number, which is called nonce, to our data, and then apply a cryptographic hash function to the whole thing to get an output. Okay. Next time we can choose another nonce and try this again. Okay, and apply the hash function, and we get another output. Now, since the output of the hash function is a random number, the number of leading zeros of the output shows how many times on average the hash function has been computed. For example, in this example, the number of leading zeros, the red portion of the output, is 6, I believe. So I guess that means that the hash function, the cryptography hash function, was used on average 2 to the 6 times. So basically, as you know, the number of zeros, again, shows how much work we have done. Hashcash has many applications. In 1997, Adam Back used it as a mechanism to deter email spams. Over time, Hashcash found other applications, mainly, I would say, in mitigating denial of service attacks. But most of us know Hashcash perhaps because of its role in the consensus algorithm of Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies. So that's the probably most famous application of Hashcash. Today, we'll see another application of Hashcash, which is to generate reputation. Okay, so let's say I'm a service provider, and I would like to enter a market and sell my service. Okay, the first thing I will do in this system is to pick up a public key. I'll pick up a public key as my ID. So I'll do it myself. I'll pick any public key I want. And then I will generate a proof of work, as you see in this figure, and use the nonce to prove my reputation to other people. Okay, so first thing to note here is that my reputation can be easily verified. If someone asks about my ID and reputation, I will provide that person with my public key and the nonce. Okay, and that person, the only thing that person has to do is to apply this hash function once and count the number of leading zeros of the output. So verifying my reputation only requires a single application of this hash function. Very easy. So that's the first remark. Second remark is that no one can steal my reputation simply because no one else has my private key. Okay, so no one else can sign on my behalf. So this is the second remark. And the third one here is that generating multiple IDs, multiple public keys, is not going to help me with regards to my reputation. Okay, because at the end, what is counted as reputation is how much work I have done, not how many IDs, how many public keys I have. So these are a few simple but interesting properties regarding this particular reputation system. Okay. Now, with this new reputation, let's make an open and permissionless mark. Okay. In our market, we will have two groups of entities. The first group are servers, which are basically the nodes that provide a service for a fee. Since the market is open, anyone can join the market as a server without any permission. So again, the market is open and permissionless. Now, the second group of entities are clients, which are basically nodes that are willing to pay for the service. In this market, as we'll see later, clients choose servers based on their fees as well as their reputation, which is not surprising, which is basically this is what we do in real life, right? We choose service providers based on the money they charge us as well as their reputation. So the same thing we do here in this market. Okay, so to get service, a client goes through a few steps. Okay, the first step is screening. I assume we do these steps in real life too. So first step is screening. In this step, the client basically collects information about the existing server. What kind of information? Well, mainly server IDs, reputations, and proof of breaches, if there are any. If there is a valid proof of breach against the server, the client will discard the server. Okay, so any proof of breach will destroy the reputation of server, and no client will take that server as a potential, service provider. Okay. So those remaining servers, those are that don't have any proof of breaches against them, are called candidate servers, which are basically the servers that the client would potentially contract with. At the second step, the client negotiates the terms of services and fees with the candidate servers. Third step, the client selects at least one server to contract with. And last step is the client. The last step, the client pays for the contract, and the contract becomes valid. Okay? So again, 4 steps: screening, negotiation, selection, and purchase. Let's talk a little bit more about these steps. Okay. So first step again was screening. As I said, in this step, the client will collect information records about servers. These records are mainly public keys, which are the IDs of the servers, the reputations of the servers, and proof of breaches, if there are any. So an interesting question perhaps here is, where are these records? Okay. Well, in our system, for every record, there is at least one node in the market who has strong incentive to store the record and share it with others. Not only store it, but share it and distribute it. For instance, a server has strong incentive to share it, to store and share its public key and reputation, right? Because if it doesn't share its public key and reputation, it basically cuts itself from the market. So how about proof of breaches? Who has incentive to store and distribute proof of breaches? A server, a defaulting server for sure doesn't have incentive to do that, right? But the victim client and the other servers have very strong incentive to store proof of breaches against a defaulting server. Because by doing so, they basically cut that defaulting server from the market, and they can get the share of market, the share of that server from the market. So again, a nice thing about this system is that for every record that we need for the system, there is at least one node that has strong incentive to store it and share it with others. Okay, so as I said before, if there is a valid proof of breach against a server, the client will discard the server. Otherwise, server is considered as a candidate server, a potential server.
I just quickly ask a question.
Sure.
I might have missed it if you touched on it already. But how does a client demonstrate, what is the proof in the proof of breach? Like how do you know that the client is not misbehaving in their proof of breach work?
Oh, a very good question. We will get to that. Basically, the main challenge, as I will mention later, is to design those contracts and proof of breaches. Okay, so that's the main challenge of this system. And hopefully when we get there, things becomes more clear. If not, I'll be happy to get back to your question and answer. So basically, client cannot misbehave here. It's only the server that can misbehave. And if the server misbehaves, then the client will be able to create a proof of breach. And that's the interesting part. How the client can do that, we'll see in one example, in one simple example. Okay. So let's move on to the second step, negotiation. The client in this step basically negotiates the terms of services and fees with the candidate servers over a communication channel. Okay. Alternatively, the servers may have a set of fixed contracts, let's say on their website, and the client can simply download those contracts and choose from those contracts. So, okay, so the third step, it's an interesting step, is selection step. In this step, the client chooses one or more servers. So sometimes just one server is enough. Sometimes for reliability reasons, the client may choose more than one server. And the client basically chooses the server based on the reputation of the server and the fee. Okay. In our paper, if you take a look at the paper, you will see that we don't enforce any particular selection method in our paper, but we suggest that any selection method should satisfy 3 conditions. Okay, so we don't enforce any selection method, just 3 recommendations, basically. We want every selection method to satisfy 3 conditions. Okay, so the first condition is called reputation awareness. Very simple condition, trivial. So if say in this condition, we say if server A has the same fee as server B, but better reputation than B, then A should be preferred to B. So in this figure, as you can see, A has the same fee as B, but has a better reputation than B. So in that case, we want the selection method. Again, we don't enforce any selection method, but we want the method to prefer A over B, okay? Which makes sense. Why not preferring A over B? A has better reputation. Now, the second condition is fee awareness, very similar to the first one. Basically says if A has the same reputation as B, but lower fee, then again, the selection method should prefer A over B. And the third condition is called damage awareness. To satisfy this condition, the selection method should choose a server whose cost of reputation is much higher than the value of the contract to the client. For instance, if the value of the contract to the client is $100, the client shouldn't select a server whose reputation can be generated with, say, $50. Okay, so again, the cost of the server's reputation, how much proof of work, how much it costs to generate that much work, should be a factor, K times the value of the contract to the client. And that K, that number, is basically a security parameter in the system. Okay, we put that K factor in the system to mitigate bribing attacks, basically. Okay. Okay, so last step, step 4 is purchase. By this step, the client has selected the server and is willing to pay the fee for this service, okay? Now, how to purchase? To purchase the service, the selected server provides the client with a contract. You see such contract here in this figure. This contract is a standalone digital file. I emphasize this. It's not a smart contract. It's just a digital file, a standalone digital file. In fact, one of the interesting features of our reputation system is that it does not need any blockchain. Okay? So that's one important remark here. We don't need any blockchain. These contracts are just simple files. Now, within the contract, the server specifies the terms of the service in particular format. The contract is, by the way, signed by the server, as you can see here, but although it's signed, the system does not consider it as a valid contract yet. So although it has the signature, it's not valid yet. Okay, to make the contract valid, it has to be presented with the server's pre-image. What's the server's pre-image? Well, if you take a look at the contract, one of the items there is a hash value, the red one, is a hash value which we call server's hash value, okay? Now, to make the contract valid, the client needs to get the pre-image of this one, okay, of this hash value. And to get it, the client must pay the server. Okay, so here you may ask, you may wonder why the client does not purchase the server's signature. Why does the client purchase a pre-image rather than a signature? Well, the answer is that purchasing a pre-image is trivial using payment channels. In fact, those of you who are aware of payment channels know that in those channels, money is atomically swapped with a pre-image. Okay, so again, we validate the contract by purchasing the server's pre-image instead of the server's signature, because purchasing pre-images is already supported by existing payment networks. So it's very easy. So that's why we do that. So again, using payment channels, we can atomically exchange pre-images with cryptocurrency. So that's why we designed the system this way. So paying for the contract will be easy. Now, what if the server breaches the contract later, after the client purchases the contract? In this case, if this happens, the client will generate a proof of breach. This proof of breach will destroy the server's reputation in the system, as no other client will contract with the defaulting server. As I mentioned before earlier, the victim and the competitors of defaulting server all have strong incentives to store the proof of breach and share it with others. Okay. So far, everything was sort of easy, right? You may wonder if there is any challenge in designing this reputation system. Well, I would say the main challenge is to design the contracts, those standalone files, in such a way that the client can generate a publicly verifiable proof of breach when a server breaches the contract. So that's the main challenge. How to design contracts in such a way that later, if the server misbehaves, the client can create a proof of breach. We think that many markets can be designed or redesigned to provide this feature. To show this, let's have one example. Okay, how about that? I'll finish this talk with one simple example. In this example, I would like to design an open and permissionless market where servers sell files, let's say ebooks, photos, movies to clients, okay? So I originally wanted to design a watchtower market for the Bitcoin Lightning Network, but I changed my mind. I thought it would be a better choice for today's talk to design a market for selling and purchasing files. Because such a market is easier to design, is more related to, I guess, the 3DM's project, which is one of the projects in the ResNet lab. So that's why I changed my mind and I said, okay, let's design a different market, an easier one. Okay. So again, this market is open, permissionless, and in this market, servers sell files, digital files to clients. Okay, so let's start with the first solution. Suppose Alice wants to purchase a file from Bob. Bob can encrypt the file F with some secret key K, and he can then give this encrypted file to Alice. Okay. Of course, Alice cannot decrypt it because Alice doesn't have the key. In the next step, Alice can purchase the encryption key K from Bob. Well, the main challenge with this solution is the last step, of course, right? Purchasing the key is tricky. What if Bob gives the wrong key or even wrong file to Alice? Well, to avoid this issue, we essentially need to trust a third party or a smart contract. Okay, but I would say neither of these options are appealing. For example, if you use a smart contract, we would increase the load of blockchain, which is probably not very appealing. In addition, there are certain markets that we may not be able to create using a smart contract. Okay, I guess the other market that I originally wanted to present, which was to design a watchtower market, that is tricky. Probably we cannot do it with smart contracts. Anyway, so that's the problem with solution one. Let's move to solution two, see how we can solve this. And in solution two, we use our reputation system, Hashcash reputation system. Now, in this system, Alice, of course, searches for servers that claim to have the file. And among those, let's say she chooses Bob. Why? Because Bob has a good reputation and has low fees. Okay. So what next? To make things move forward, Bob signs a contract that looks like what you see on the right. Okay, so what do we have in this contract? Well, The contract has a few items in it, including the hash of the file. You see the first line is the hash of the file, H sub F, is the hash digest of the file. Basically, we use it as the name of the file. What else we have? The hash of the encryption key, HK. So hash value of the key, HK, is also mentioned, included in the file. And in this particular contract, the server, in this particular contract, the server's hash value, as you can see, is set equal to the hash of the encryption key. Okay. So it's a very simple contract. So Alice will get this contract as well as the encrypted file from Bob over a communication channel. Then in the second step, Alice pays for the contract and gets the decryption key. Okay, so basically Alice will pay to get the preimage of this value. Preimage of HK is K. Okay, so basically Alice pays to get K. And as I said before, she can easily do it using a payment channel or payment network, like Lightning Network. Okay, so Alice gets that. Now, what if Alice applies the decryption key that she purchased and gets a wrong file? Well, if this happens, Alice will create a proof of breach. Okay. For this solution, the proof of breach can have three elements. Okay, let's go through this element. The first element is the encrypted file itself. The second element is the server's preimage that Alice got when she paid for the contract. So that's the second element of proof of breach. And the third element is the contract itself. Okay, so I claim that this is a proof of breach. Given these three elements, I claim that anyone can check if Bob has breached the contract. So for instance, let's say I as a person, outside the system, I want to check this. Okay, so what do? I first make sure that the second element, this one in the proof of breach, the second element is truly the preimage of the server's hash value in the contract. So the first thing again I check is that, is this element, the second element, the preimage of HK? I apply the hash function on this and check whether I get HK, the number mentioned in the contract. So this is the first thing I'm going to check. The second thing, if this check goes through, that probably gives me a sign that, oh, Alice truly paid for the contract. So the contract is basically valid. So next step, I will decrypt the first element, which is the encrypted file. So I'll decrypt that using the second element. And then I apply the hash function on the decryption file, and I check that with this HF. Okay, so I'll check it with HF, and if they do not match, it shows that Bob has breached the contract. As simple as that. So again, as a person, any random person, I can check whether this proof of breach is a valid one or not. And if it's a valid one, it will basically destroy Bob's reputation. Okay, so, well, this works, but it has this like a tiny bit of shortcoming. And that shortcoming is that the proof of breach can be long. Why? Because the first element, which is the encrypted file, can be large. What if we are talking about a movie, right? The first element can be very large. And the question is whether we can have a shorter, perhaps ideally constant size proof of breach here. And the answer, I guess, is yes. Okay. And this is the art of designing contracts. The question is, can we design the contract in another way such that the proof of breach is smaller, as the constant size doesn't grow with the size of the file? And the answer is yes, we can do that. So this brings us to the next solution, the last one, which is similar to solution 2, except we use a Merkle tree. Okay, and the goal here is to make the proof of bridge shorter. In this solution, we divide the file into constant size blocks. In this particular example, the file was divided into 4 blocks, block 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we apply a Merkle tree and take the root of the tree as the digest of the file. So instead of using hash of the file, I use the root of the Merkle tree as the digest of the file. Okay, now Alice wants to purchase a file with this Merkle tree root from Bob. Now, in this solution, for every block, Bob sends a tuple with 4 elements. So for block 1, Bob sends 4 elements, 1, 2, 3, 4. Block 2, again, 4 elements, and so on. So what are the elements here? The first element is the encrypted block. So encrypted block I. The second element is hash of block I. The third element is the hash of the key, secret key K. And the last element is Bob's signature on the first 3 elements. So Bob basically signs the whole thing, okay, the whole tuple. Now, Alice first gets all these tuples. In this example, we have 4 tuples. So Alice first gets all of them. Then she generates the Merkle tree using the received tuples, constructs the Merkle tree using the received hashes, and verifies that the root of the Merkle tree is the correct one. Okay, so again, take a look at here. Alice gets H of block 1, H of block 2, H of block 3, H of block 4. So basically, Alice gets H1, H2, H3, and H4. So what she does, she constructs the Merkle tree using these hash values she was given, that Bob gives Alice. So H1, H2, H3, H4. She creates this Merkle tree and gets some root, and we'll check that root to see if this is the right one. And if this is the right one, she goes to the next step. And the next step is to pay Bob to get the preimage of this element, HK. Preimage of HK is K, which is the decryption key, okay? So again, things can still go wrong. For example, suppose that after Alice pays for the preimage and decodes the blocks, she realizes that, well, there is some problem with block 3. In particular, by problem, I mean that she finds that the hash of the decryption of block 3. So again, Alice got a key. Using that key, she's going to decrypt block 3, take the hash, and she realizes that, well, it's not equal to the hash of block 3. This is basically the hash Bob gave Alice, okay, in one of the tuples, in the third tuple. And she realized that, well, this is not the same. So this is a wrong block. So if this happens, Alice can create a short proof of bridge by including the preimage she got from Bob at the time of purchase and the tuple she received from Bob. Okay, so she adds this element, the preimage she purchased, which is supposed to be the decryption key, and the tuple corresponding to block 3. Okay, and again, I claim that any person can check whether this is a valid proof of bridge, whether Alice is right. Let's say, again, I want to check if the proof of bridge is valid. Okay, first I check if the first element of the proof is the preimage of the third element. So I check whether this is truly the preimage of HK. If that's the case, it's a good sign for Alice. It shows that Alice has truly paid for this. Also verify, of course, I will verify Bob's signature as well. I have Bob's public key. Okay, it's the ID of Bob. I'll check the signature, which is this one, the last element of the tuple. Next step, I will decrypt the first element, this one, using this as a key, and take the hash and check whether the result is the same as the second element of the tuple. And if it's not the same as the second element, I know that Alice is right. I know that Bob breached the contract. As you can see here, the size of the proof of breach does not increase with the size of the file because Here, I'm using only the encryption of block 3, which has a constant size. And another interesting thing is that you don't see Alice's name here. Okay, although it's a proof of breach against Bob, you don't see Alice's name. But still, it's a valid proof of breach, and it's going to destroy Bob's reputation. Well, there are other details about our reputation system that you can find in our paper. For instance, in our paper we described various attacks against the system and explained how our system can defend itself against such attacks. In summary, our Hashcash reputation system is a system that uses proof of work to generate reputation. With this system, we can create open markets in which service providers create their own reputation, but the client can destroy a provider's reputation when the provider breaches a contract. One of the advantages of this system is that it requires no smart contract or trusted third parties. And the main challenge, as I mentioned, is the main challenge in using this system, this reputation system, is to design contracts to enable clients to generate short proof of breaches when a contract is breached. Well, thank you so much, and I'll be happy to take questions here.
So the point of the proof of work is to make sure that some server has been up for a long time, basically, right? That they didn't just start yesterday.
No. In fact, you can start right away. That's a good thing. You don't need to build a reputation over time. Okay, so I guess the main point is that you have something at stake. Okay,
the sunk cost of compute.
Yeah, so I guess alternatively, what you could do is to burn money, let's say burn Bitcoin, and show the proof of burn as your reputation. And you can do it immediately. Like in 10 minutes, you can have a huge reputation. Just burn 100K, right? You get a huge reputation right at the beginning.
Gotcha. Okay, and then another basic question I think you answered, but I was still confused about what's preventing a client from, once they know the server's pre-image, of just using that information to create false contracts that the server never agreed to?
No, this pre-image is not unique. It differs from one contract to another one. So if you have a pre-image for one contract, doesn't mean that you have it for other contracts. So server will generate, different hash values for different contracts.
Okay.
Yeah, of course, the server can create a proof of breach against itself, but it doesn't make sense for a server to do, right? I assume if you use smart contracts as a different way, then servers might have incentive to do so because they can maybe, if we don't design our smart contracts well, maybe the server has incentive to do that to get his money out of the smart contract. But here, I don't see any incentive for the server to do it against itself.
So a question from my end is, when a client creates a proof of breach, what happens to the actual transaction involved? So obviously that would destroy the server reputation, but what happens to the actual transaction?
So in the paper, we describe another mechanism for settlements. Okay, so alternatively, the server can talk to the client, say that, okay, I made a mistake, I was down and I couldn't provide this service, let's settle down, right? And for that, we have another hash value in the contract called client hash value. So the server will purchase that pre-image of the client's value. And if the contract is presented with the client's pre-image, basically the contract becomes invalid. So the system considers that as is invalid. So that's another mechanism for servers to settle down with the client if something bad happens. Yeah, but in the worst case, the client will lose its transaction, will lose its money, right? If, let's say the server says, "Oh, I'm not interested. I made a mistake. If my reputation goes to zero, I don't care." In that particular case, the client loses, the money.
And to answer my question from earlier in the talk, it sounds as simple as the proof of breach has to be confirmed by a third party, and that's so that prevents a server from creating a client account to submit phony proof of breaches just to destroy the reputation of a competing server, right? So each proof of breach has to be verified by us run through the smart contract or third-party watchtower or something.
Again, there is no smart contracts here. So these proof of breaches are standalone files, like documents. And anyone, absolutely anyone can check whether something is wrong, whether that proof of breach is valid or not. So as a new client, when I want to consider a server, first thing is that I collect information about that server, like including server ID, its reputation. And the third thing is whether there is any proof of breaches against that server. I search for this information, and if there is any, I'll verify it, and I will discard the server if the proof of breach is valid. Yeah.
Is it up to the client to decide how to do the trade-offs between, price plus and reputation? That's completely up to the client.
Oh, yes. So again, we didn't enforce any selection method in our work. It says it's totally up to the client. Just as a free market. Our goal was to make it like free, absolutely free market, like the market we have. But we had recommendations. Like we said, the selection method should satisfy 3 conditions, right? If there are 2 servers, both of them, they have the same fee, but one of them has better reputation. Well, that's the first condition, right? It's better to go with the one that has higher reputation. Yeah, so it's very simple conditions. Otherwise, you can choose any selection method you want. So yeah, this is another probably interesting thing about this system. There are lots of flexibilities in the system. We don't enforce almost anything.
So I'm almost certain that I'm just not understanding a key piece, but what is the mechanism that prevents a server from doing some sort of strategic pseudo Sybil-like attack where they are creating client accounts and then creating additional accounts so that as a client they can create proof of breach against a competing server to knock their reputation down, and then from another sector of the network confirming that proof of breach, even if the proof of breach is not in fact valid? I'm thinking, how is it possible for a server to create a proof of breach against another server?
So the only way is that this server contracts with the other server, and the second server defaults, right? That's the only way you can create a valid proof of breach against the server. Okay, the only way. Either I would say the second way is that the server creates a proof of breach against itself, which doesn't make sense for the server to do that. So for any other entity to make a proof of breach against the server must breach the contract. Otherwise, that person cannot prove that. Let's say in this market, how can a client prove that the server breached the contract, right? If you go back to this slide, we'll say that I don't think there's a way for a client to do that. Okay, so that's a nice thing about it. It's impossible for someone to create a proof of breach if the server hasn't breached the contract.
Okay, thank you. And we've been monopolizing questions. So if there are questions from others in the audience, please jump in. You can type it in the chat if you don't feel like being in the recording.
And I guess I mentioned my email address there in my slides, and probably can find it in other ways too. And I'll be more than happy to answer any questions. So anytime you have questions, please email me.
So. Okay, thank you, Dr. Khabbazian. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. And thank you everyone else for joining. If you have suggestions for a future speaker, or if you'd like to present your own research, please email us at research@protocol.ai. If you didn't hear the announcement last week, Protocol Labs Research has recently expanded our grant offerings to include PhD and postdoc fellowships, Young Investigator Awards, research sabbatical grants, and a number of other funding opportunities, which you can check out at grants.protocol.ai. To receive announcements and updates like this in the future, sign up for our mailing list and specify what types of emails you'd like to receive. The link to do this is in the description below. For those of you watching on YouTube, please remember to hit the like and subscribe buttons and share this video. Join us next week to hear from University of Calgary Professor Alfred Lehar on decentralized exchanges. Thank you for joining, everyone. We will see you next time.